A small far-right political party shakes up an age-old balance of power. It's a scenario that's been repeated around Europe and elsewhere. The latest country to swing to the right is Portugal. Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, Portugal's recent election saw the centre-right Democratic Alliance gain a wafer-thin margin over the centre-left Socialists. But the biggest winner was the far-right Chega party, with a much better performance than anyone had expected. So, what does this result signal for the rest of Europe? We'll answer that in a moment, but first, this report from Daniela Ferreira Pinto with a roundup of the result from Lisbon.
Difficult times here in Portugal as the country struggles to make sense of Sunday's electoral results. It's a political tie in parliament, with neither the centre-right coalition nor the Socialist Party securing a majority in parliament. The centre-right coalition has a slight advantage in the number of members of parliament, and they have said they will try to form a government, while the Socialist Party, that had been ruling the country since 2015, has said they will be in opposition. Now, the big surprise of the night was the rise of the far-right party Chega, that much more than doubled its presence in the Portuguese parliament. But no party wants to have the support of this extremist far-right party that has been campaigning with anti-immigration slogans, anti-corruption, stepping back in fundamental rights for women's rights and rights in the LGBTQ community.
People are mostly surprised and concerned. Concerned because we don't know what the next couple of weeks will look like and if a government will be formed, if there is a government, if they will be able to pass legislation and approve budgets. But also concerned because over 1 million people voted for the far right as Portugal nears its 50th celebration of the Carnation Revolution. So that's something that will need to be studied, whether this is a vote of protest, a vote against institutions, against the parties that have ruled the country for the last 5 decades, or if this is a vote that is very aligned with the propositions and the policies that this far-right party is offering. So that's something that will need to be looked into in the next couple of weeks. But for now, people are also feeling the uncertainty of not knowing exactly how the parliament is going to look and if the country is going to have to go back to elections anytime soon.
Well, let's bring in our guests. In Geneva is Ricardo Leite, a former Portuguese Member of Parliament and a medical doctor. Patricia Calca is a research fellow and assistant professor of political science at the University Institute of Lisbon. She joins us from the Portuguese capital. And in Florence, in northern Italy, is Hugo Ferrinho Lopez, visiting researcher at the European University Institute. Patricia, I'll come to you first. 8 years of Socialist Party rule in Portugal is over. Talk us through what happens next.
Hello, thank you for the invitation. Well, as you may know, we are at the moment with a framing of uncertainty because, as you also know, the results were very close between the two bigger parties, and the majority would maybe need of other parties eventually, and we have now a new scenario that the third bigger party with a higher capacity of decision is the extreme right party Chega. So at the moment, the decision of how is going to be the next government of Portugal is quite uncertain. The President of the Republic, that formally constitutes the government, is now starting to hear the different parties, and so we'll have to see how it goes. With the note that the second most voted party was the one that was in government until recently.
Ricardo, were you surprised by those results?
Well, thanks for having me. Sadly, I am not surprised with the rise of the extreme right in Portugal. There have been consistent reports in all of the polls that we were seeing over the months. It's one of the things that the polls actually got right, There was an expectation that Chega would hit between 15 to 20%. Of course, to see that in reality, more than 1 million Portuguese citizens voting for them, really makes us think about the origins of the sentiment of the people who are voting for this extreme right party, especially because we're seeing a rise of this movement, even in regions that until not too many years ago were strongly dominated, for example, by a communist party. So going from one extreme to the other really shows that many of these votes are people who are tired of the current establishment. They're tired of the mainstream parties. It's an anti-system vote in a way. But we also have to highlight that, and I think this is a part that I think is surprising, the outpour of number of voters was tremendous. We had the most number of voters in a very long time in Portugal, which means that people actually got off their couches, if you will, to come out and vote and express their discontent to the system. The fact that the Social Democrats won through the coalition with the Christian Democrats, it is, as Patricia was saying, a very close result. We're still waiting, actually, for 4 MPs to be designated from the externally, the diaspora Portuguese voting MPs. The counting is still happening. We'll only have the final results on March 18th, which can actually lead to a parliamentary tie, which leads to a lot of distress in the country because the Portuguese people want to see a government that is capable of doing reforms. The biggest confirmation was the huge lack of support that the socialist government had coming out of this election. They had a full majority of 117 seats in a 230-seat parliament. They're down to less than 80 seats now. People said they're fed up, but it's clear that people are not happy also with the alternatives that were out there, and a lot voted for the extreme right.
Hugo, let's take a look at the results. I'll just talk you through it. So the far-right Chega party won 18% of the vote, giving it 48 seats. That's up from just 12 seats in the last election only 2 years ago. Centre-right Democratic Alliance, they captured 29% of the vote and 79 seats. And the centre-left Socialist Party, they gained 28% of the votes and 77 seats. I mean, it's clear Chega have gone from strength to strength in quite a short space of time.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me, first of all. Yes, but let me clarify one thing from the start. If we exclude the Christian Democrats, MPs elected from the Democratic Alliance, there is a tie between the Socialists and the Social Democrats, 77 MPs each. So we have a close tie in this election. As Ricardo was saying, we are still waiting for the results of the foreign constituencies, so we are not sure how the parliament will be in 2 weeks, 3 weeks from now. One thing is sure, this is the highest vote share of right-wing parties in democratic history in Portugal, but also in only 50 years after transition to democracy, when a right-wing dictatorship ended, we have more or less 50 MPs, radical right MPs in parliament. So the scenario now is likely to be not stability for the main parties to government. The president is expected to appoint the leader of the Social Democrats to form government, although they need at least a vote yes from the socialists or the radical right to pass government in parliament.
Patricia, what's your reading of the Chega vote? Why have so many people who've presumably previously voted for very different other parties, why have they all been drawn towards Chega?
So we have some studies already on that. So with the available data that we have been collecting in the last years, we don't know still about this election too much. And it's hard, especially to talk about transfer of voting transfers, because we really cannot say it. We can speculate a bit, but very carefully, because it could even happen, and I'm sorry to go a bit back, we could even think that the participation now was even more towards this party than we can expect if we think that maybe some of the voters that vote in the last elections didn't felt the urge to come and vote. And that means that the increasing was potentially not just the 14% that we saw, but like if we think about the ones that would not vote because they didn't have incentives to vote, that the increase was even bigger. And this is something that we really have to focus in the next times in terms of studies. In what regards Chega, what we know about the type of vote is that in general, in terms of gender, we have a majority of voters that are masculine, so they are men, with like old adults, but not old people. And now it's very hard to distinguish exactly the reasons besides what my colleagues already said, that is a discontentment, because all the electoral districts have elected MPs from Chega with the exception of one. So this is like, given the structure of Portugal, this is a strong message. We felt the discontentment in the streets, but also I would like to underline something that we still also don't know exactly what was the impact. That was a major salience in the news towards the extreme right, and with consequences that may be this. And so I would like to underline the needed responsibility of the mass media in general. Of course, some have more have more headlines that are more provocative, let us say it like that. But there was a big public space given to the head of Chega, and I think, and I strongly believe that this had a big impact also in the votes that we saw last Sunday.
Ricardo, talk to us a bit about the leader of Chega, Andre Ventura, former football pundit. He really focused in on immigration, didn't he? I mean, is that a key point in what has happened here?
Well, Andre is known to be, well, he's a trained jurist. He was one of the best students in law school, but then he did become a very popular figure through his football commentary on one of the more tabloid related news channels. And from there, he became a member of actually the Social Democratic Party. He actually ran for mayor for one of the cities where he lost. And having had difficulties in actually trying to take the leadership in the Social Democrats, he decided to create a party of his own. And he created a very strong movement in Portugal and also internationally, connecting very directly with Salvini in Italy, with Le Pen in France, and growing tremendously fast, getting financing to be able to build up his party. And so he is known to be an intelligent and very savvy politician, has clearly no problem in saying the different things about the same topic in the same day to fit whatever the audience he's speaking to. And he did choose some clear topics that resonate with the people. I mean, immigration related to security was clearly one of them. He stood by the police like no other political party in fighting for rights for police officers. That gained him a lot of support in the general public and among that particular group of people. His fight against corruption, I would say, was core. And this is something people are fed up of, a judicial system that seems not to work, that is extremely slow in presenting results, in which there is a sense of lack of consequence of corruption cases. And so he builds up on that public sentiment that is real, that people feel. And so those issues all together, I believe, along with taking a stance of going against the government, going against the establishment, saying that he, one of his last advertisements was actually focusing on the leader of the two main parties, of the Socialists and the Social Democrats, saying, these guys have been in power for the last 50 years, now give me a chance. Clearly, 1 million+ Portuguese decided to do exactly that.
Hugo, was that a very clever strategy to zone in on immigration and all the allegations of corruption, do you think, that the Portuguese public have had enough of those two issues?
We have data showing that André Ventura in this election lowered a bit the salience of immigration in his discourse, although keeping it on the electoral manifesto. However, on the other hand, he raised it a lot more on corruption issues, which is not by chance, of course, related with the way the government fell because of corruption scandals, and even the prime minister's relation with the public prosecution investigation recently on the 7th of November. So he addressed this campaign as an entrepreneur, talking about mostly about corruption and a bit, but less than before, about immigration. However, I must stress that none of these two issues are considered by Portuguese citizens as the most important problems the country is facing. We have both international and national data supporting that the issues that people most care about actually are education, health, the national healthcare system, housing, and the rising costs of living, broadly speaking, the economy, wages, taxes, so far. And so on. So I would say that he approached this campaign like speaking to anti-establishment voters, as Ricardo was saying just right now. And there is clearly a relation between higher turnout rates and vote for the radical right. As we know from the previous elections that most of radical right the voters in Portugal came from former abstentionists, people that did not turn out to vote, and blank, null, and valid votes, a bit less from the two main parties. So in this election, it's likely that the same has happened. So Chega was able to grasp votes from people that left the couch, as Ricardo was saying, and obviously some votes from other parties. We don't have data for sure by now to conclude that, but especially people that are dissatisfied with the system, as Patricia was saying. So this is clearly not a protest vote, but a vote against the establishment, against the main parties. And to conclude only this is perhaps the beginning of the end of the de facto two-party system in Portugal, where despite we have a multi-party system, government alternation has always been centered between the two main parties, the Socialists and the Social Democrats. Now we have three leagues. The first league is still the Socialists and the Social Democrats, followed by the second league, where is the radical right, and the third league is everyone else. Ranging from 1 to 8% of vote share.
Patricia, if this really is the end of a two-party system in your country, surely the reality is that neither of the main parties want to form any coalition or even negotiate with Chega. Is that a fair assessment?
So there is 2 points there. I'm unsure if this is the end of the two-party system. The data seems to indicate, but we have to see in the next elections and eventually 1 and 2 more to see if the trend is maintained. Because we should not forget that Chega doesn't have professional politicians in their lines, and so they already picked up some, for instance, from the Social Democrats, but not people that were really very important or seen. So I believe that we have to see if there is an effective professionalization of the party, because suddenly we'll have 48 MPs, most of them without experience, in the parliament, where the rules are different, and you cannot simply bully the other MPs in a way. There's rules, right? So the experience matters, and also who was there before, and also somehow shows how this works matters. So we don't know, this is the first thing, if this is going to be effectivated in the next elections. That I expect to not take too long, so I don't believe that we are going to achieve the 4-year legislature from these results. The other thing is that both of the parties said, so both of the big parties, the center-right and center-left parties, so the Social Democrats and the Socialists, said that they would not coalesce with Chega, and this was clear again on Sunday evening. But we know that there is plenty of ways to address this with informal agreements. So from one legislation to the other, negotiation, and so on. The problem, maybe the biggest problem here, although it seems that the Socialist Party is the loser of the elections, although we actually have to see, like it was very well underlined with the next 4 mandates, is that the Social Democrats have a really difficult task, because it seems like that some of the voters, so they are competing, or Chega is competing with the Social Democrats for a space in the right. Of course, there is not in all the space, but in a part where there is some intersection. And so the Social Democrats, besides of the fact that said that they would not coalesce formally with Chega, they also have to maintain their position, or else they may lose either voters, either, like I said, professional politicians at the local level, at the district level, and so on. And so I would say that the Social Democrats have to be extremely strategic in the next moments, in the next few months, because in order to differentiate them from Chega in important issues, like Hugo said, that are not even these ones that are just driven by reasons that are less, let us say, ethically accepted, by real issues that need a change in the country. The Social Democrats have a really hard task at their front, because they may just lose space.
Let's bring in Ricardo. Ricardo, do you think far-right groups across Europe, so many elections this year, far-right groups will be looking at Portugal's results and thinking, if Chega can do it in Portugal, we can do it in our country?
Well, actually, I would say that Portugal is a latecomer to this game, in the sense that we were already seeing this phenomena across the globe. I foresee that we are going to live a very challenging year. As we all know, more than half of the world population is going to the ballot. So many countries are going to see a voting process happen. We're seeing a probable return of Trump in the United States. We're seeing many European countries, including France, where the fragility of the presidency of Macron is evident and to grow. We saw the support of Le Pen to André Ventura in Portugal. So I do see it as a community of leaders that are trying to galvanize each other, certainly. How this will all pan out, we'll have to wait and see. But mind you that, I mean, the biggest loser really is the socialist government in Portugal. That is no doubt. Having gone from 117 MPs to around 80, even less, it goes to show that people were not happy with the government. But the thing is, the transfer of those MPs and those votes, many of them ended up going to the extreme right as an anti-establishment movement, as we have acknowledged it here. But 60% of the population in Portugal still believe in moderate democratic parties, which are the Socialists and Social Democrats. However, it's a trend that is disappearing slowly. And therefore, I think this is a wake-up call for the established parties, particularly in Portugal. The main parties have to wake up and smell the coffee and understand that they need to, as was just said, they need to change their strategy. They need to change the way they address the concerns of the people. And there has to be a regaining of trust that these parties are capable of doing the reforms that are necessary, as was mentioned, housing, education, healthcare, and so forth, that are critical areas that affect the country, but also in terms of our economy and the opportunity, especially for the younger population. The youth vote towards the extreme right is quite astonishing. And that is something that is concerning for our future, and that I think everybody has to reflect very seriously and act upon that reflection.
That's a very good point. Hugo, do you think Chega will be looking at all of this and thinking, OK, there's going to be more elections, probably in 2 years again, there will be another general election, and we can grow even further?
Well, I think first, Chega reached the high number of votes equal to Jobbik in Hungary. So now in Hungary and Portugal, the radical right is scoring the best performance across Europe. But on the other hand, I think Chega also faces a huge challenge, because if the government depends on Chega to pass legislation or not to pass legislation, Chega may face strategic voting in the next election. So what I'm saying is that if Chega doesn't support the government and the government fell because of Chega, then Chega might be damaged on polls on election day. On the other hand, Chega also needs to comply with being a protest towards the government. So it's kind of a middle ground, difficult in the middle of the bridge that Chega needs to balance.
Hugo, Patricia and Ricardo, thank you all so much. Obrigado. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable TRT World. And if you like what you see, please do hit that subscribe button. But for now, from me and Brady and all of the team here on Roundtable, goodbye and thank you for watching.